what a man secretly fears when a woman withdraws into silence. Carl Jung. Have you ever wondered why a man trembles inwardly when the woman he thought he owned retreats into silence? Not the silence of passivity, but the silence of presence, the kind that feels like a cathedral echoing with secrets he cannot touch. In that quiet, a man's carefully constructed world begins to quake. Carl Jung would say it is the confrontation with his own shadow, projected upon the feminine figure before him. For when she closes her lips and folds her voice back into herself, he no longer has a mirror to deflect his own chaos. He is forced to sit with the reflection he has long avoided. The man fears silence because silence strips him naked. Words, even arguments, are still a tether. As long as she speaks, whether in anger, softness, or pleading, he knows he matters. Her voice proves his existence. But when she withdraws, when she allows the mystery of her absence to fill the space where her warmth once was, he feels the abyss of his own insufficiency. The silence whispers, "You are not the center. You are not needed here. You are replaceable." This is not mere insecurity, it is archetypal. Deep within the masculine unconscious lies the terror of being abandoned by the Great Mother, of being cast out from the womb of feminine acceptance. To a man who has not integrated his shadow, a woman's silence resurrects this primal fear. Suddenly, he is the infant left crying in the cradle, the lover left outside the door, the hero stripped of his armor. And it is not her punishment that haunts him, but the confrontation with his own inner void. Silence is not empty. It is filled with meaning, with the weight of the unsaid, with the authority of boundaries that require no explanation. Men who have relied on control, manipulation, or constant validation find themselves unraveling when the feminine refuses to feed them with sound. A woman who knows how to withhold her energy is more powerful than one who unleashes her fury, for rage is still entanglement, but silence is sovereignty. And here is the paradox. A man may claim to love mystery, to be drawn to the enigmatic nature of the feminine, yet when that mystery turns toward him in the form of withdrawal, he panics. The silent woman does not play the role he expects: nurturer, caretaker, emotional provider. She steps out of the archetype he thought she belonged to and becomes the unknown, the uncanny. Jung would call this the anima in its dark aspect, the feminine force that confronts him with his soul's unfinished work. If you are a woman listening to this, you may recognize the trembling power of silence in your own life. Think of the moments when you stopped explaining, stopped justifying, stopped trying to make him understand. Did you notice the shift? His voice may have grown louder, his gestures more desperate, or perhaps he retreated into sulking shadows, attempting to lure you back with guilt. All of this arises from fear. Fear that without your words, without your emotional energy, he must face himself. In silence, you become a mirror he cannot manipulate. The unspoken forces him to see his own emptiness, his own projections, his own hunger. Silence makes him question his worth. This is not cruelty, it is initiation. For in those moments, he has the rare opportunity to confront what Jung called the individuation process, the painful awakening to who he truly is beyond roles, masks, and external validation. Yet most men resist this initiation, and so they fear the woman who withdraws. There is something almost divine in the feminine ability to detach. Silence is not absence, it is presence in its purest form. It says, "I exist beyond you. I do not require your recognition to breathe." To a man whose ego is entangled in domination or dependence, this truth feels like annihilation. He fears not her anger, but her independence. He fears not her words, but her refusal to speak. He fears the revelation that she can live, perhaps even thrive, without him. Some women mistake silence for weakness, but in truth it is the opposite. Silence is not surrender, it is the weapon of queens, the shield of priestesses, the stance of those who know their own worth. The ancient mystics spoke of the sacred power of stillness, the way mountains speak louder than storms. When a woman chooses silence consciously, she becomes unshakable. Her energy gathers inward, and the man feels its absence like a tide pulled back before a tsunami. He may not name it, but his body remembers. His soul quivers. In every relationship dynamic, silence is a test. The man who cannot endure it has not faced himself. The woman who cannot hold it has not claimed her power. But when silence is embodied with grace, it becomes transformative. It burns away pretense, exposes neediness, and forces the hidden truths into the open. Jung taught that the shadow must be faced, not avoided. And silence is one of the sharpest mirrors of the shadow. What a man secretly fears is not losing her voice, it is losing the illusion that he controls her reality. Her silence is a rebellion against being defined by him. It is the ultimate act of individuation, the breaking away from unconscious enmeshment. And in that breaking, the true dynamic is revealed. He is a man searching for his soul, and she is the silence that demands he find it. When a woman withdraws into silence, a man finds himself confronted with the weight of his own unprocessed emotions. The chatter of daily life, the back and forth of arguments, the casual reassurance of a soft word, all these serve as distractions from the deeper currents flowing underneath. But silence is a stark mirror. It forces him to hear what has always been there, the echo of his insecurity, the roar of his unmet needs, the whispers of past wounds left unresolved. Jung would say the anima, the feminine archetype within him, rises in these moments like a phantom demanding acknowledgement. He may call her cold, distant, detached. Yet what he truly means is that her silence terrifies him. In the quiet, he senses judgment without words, boundaries without explanation, endings without closure. Silence is ambiguity, and ambiguity is the enemy of the ego. The ego thrives on certainty, on knowing where it stands, on keeping control. Without her voice to reassure him, even through conflict, he begins to spiral. His mind invents stories. Is she leaving? Has she found another? Have I lost her? These imagined narratives are the ego's attempt to grasp what cannot be grasped, the autonomy of another soul. To the unprepared man, the silence of a woman is not simply the absence of sound. It is exile. He feels cast out from the warmth of her world, stripped of the privileges her presence once gave him. The withdrawal of her words feels like the withdrawal of love itself. Yet in truth, it is not punishment but reflection. Her silence reflects his dependence back to him. It shows him how much of his identity was built on her responses. It reveals how little he has cultivated an inner life of his own. Some men, when faced with this silence, will attempt to break it with force. They raise their voices, slam doors, throw accusations. They try to provoke her into speaking, for even anger feels safer than absence. Others retreat into sulking withdrawal, hoping she will rush in to comfort them. Both reactions stem from fear, the fear of irrelevance, the fear of abandonment, the fear of facing one's own emptiness. And yet, this is the very initiation that could transform them if they allowed it. For silence is a threshold. It is the dark cave the hero must enter if he wishes to be reborn. A man who can sit in the silence of a woman without demanding, without controlling, without collapsing into self-pity, is a man who has begun to individuate. He is learning to draw strength from within rather than siphon it from the feminine presence outside himself. He is discovering the capacity to hold mystery without needing to solve it, to honor her autonomy without making it about his own worth. But make no mistake, the majority of men never reach this point. They fear silence because they fear truth. They fear discovering that the woman does not orbit around them, that her world does not collapse in their absence, that she is whole without their approval. This strikes at the heart of the male ego, which has been conditioned to believe it is the sun around which everything else revolves. Her silence proves otherwise. She is her own universe, radiant in her withdrawal. And that independence burns him like the gaze of a star he cannot touch. For the woman, silence is not merely the absence of words, it is the reclamation of energy. Every time she argues to prove her worth, every time she explains to soothe his insecurity, every time she justifies her choices, she pours herself into him. But silence says, no more. The energy remains with me. This withdrawal is magnetic because it signals self-possession. A woman who keeps her energy is more alluring than one who gives it away freely, and the man senses this instinctively. He does not fear losing her body, he fears losing access to the well of power that her attention represents. You may have noticed it yourself, when you stop explaining, he suddenly listens more intently. When you withdraw your words, he chases your presence. When you grow still, he grows restless. The silence is not passive, it is active, alive, commanding. It forces him to reckon with his own dependence. And in this reckoning, you hold the power. Not because you control him, but because you refuse to be controlled. Carl Jung spoke often of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny, repress, and project onto others. When a man confronts a woman's silence, he confronts his shadow. Her quiet detachment brings forth his hidden fears of rejection, insignificance, inadequacy. He may try to project these onto her, calling her heartless, unfeeling, manipulative. But in truth, it is his shadow crying out. If he has the courage to face it, silence becomes his teacher. If not, it remains his tormentor. For the awakened woman, silence is not a weapon of cruelty but a tool of clarity. It cuts through noise. It creates space for truth to surface. It allows her to reclaim her own rhythm rather than be dragged into the chaos of another. This is why silence feels so threatening, because it is pure autonomy, and autonomy is what the insecure ego cannot tolerate. And so, what a man secretly fears is not silence itself, but what it reveals. It reveals how dependent he has become. It reveals how shallow his roots are. It reveals the hollowness of his confidence when it is not fed by her constant attention. Silence reveals the truth that no man wants to face, that the woman he thought belonged to him belongs, first and always, to herself. The silence of a woman is not merely a pause in conversation, it is an existential event. It is the moment when the mask slips, when the man feels stripped of the illusion that he holds dominion over her emotional landscape. In her stillness, he no longer sees a reflection of his power. Instead, he confronts the unyielding mystery of her autonomy. Jung would say that this is the anima refusing to play the role he unconsciously cast her in, breaking free from the archetype of caretaker or muse, and instead revealing herself as sovereign, untamed, and whole. In that silence, his imagination grows louder. Every unspoken thought becomes a haunting. He begins to wonder what lies behind her closed lips, what truths are held in the quiet distance of her eyes. Does she still care? Is she drifting away? Is she already gone in spirit, even if her body remains? The masculine mind, trained to conquer and define, cannot endure such uncertainty. Silence becomes unbearable not because of what is absent, but because of what it forces him to confront, the truth that her inner world is his blind spot, forever beyond his grasp. This is why many men will try to provoke the silent woman into reaction. They crave her words, even if those words come wrapped in anger. Anger is predictable, manageable. Silence is not. Anger still ties her to him, still marks him as significant enough to ignite fire. But silence unravels him. Silence suggests that she has withdrawn her energy altogether, that he is no longer the gravitational center of her attention. This is the true wound, the sense of vanishing importance. For the fragile ego, to be ignored is a fate worse than conflict. And yet, paradoxically, the silence also enthralls him. It carries the weight of feminine mystery, an enigma that has magnetized men since the dawn of time. He both dreads and desires it, much like the mythic hero standing at the threshold of the underworld. He knows that beyond the silence lies either transformation or annihilation, and so he lingers in a restless state of fascination and fear. In this sense, the silent woman embodies the archetype of the dark goddess, destroyer of illusions, awakener of souls. For the woman, this silence is not always deliberate punishment. More often, it is survival. To constantly explain, soothe, or justify is to bleed oneself dry. Silence is the choice to retreat into sacred self-possession, to stop feeding energy into a cycle that no longer serves growth. It is an act of conservation, of recentering. And in that conservation, power is reborn. What terrifies him most is not that she has gone quiet, but that she may have discovered she does not need him to complete her. And here lies the hidden alchemy. Silence transforms the dynamic. The man accustomed to her endless availability now faces the abyss of his own lack. He must ask himself, who am I without her constant reflection? What do I become when I can no longer draw life from her voice? The silence forces him into shadow work, whether he desires it or not. Every insecurity, every buried fear, every wound of abandonment surges upward, demanding acknowledgement. Silence is the mirror he cannot escape. For those who are listening now, consider this: how many times have you rushed to break your silence out of fear of losing him? How many times have you softened your boundary, spoken when you wanted to stay still, explained when you longed to retreat? Each time, you surrendered a fragment of your sovereignty. But when you choose silence with intention, not as manipulation, but as self-honoring, you awaken the deepest truths of the dynamic. You discover whether his connection to you is rooted in love, or merely in the comfort of your constant emotional labor. Jung reminded us that individuation requires detachment from the projections of others. In silence, you detach from his projections of who he believes you should be. You are no longer the endless giver, the predictable nurturer, the echo of his desires. You become instead the unknown, and in becoming unknown, you regain your power. For nothing is more magnetic than the woman who belongs fully to herself. The man secretly fears this self-belonging. It unmasks the dependency he has cloaked in pride. It reveals that his attraction was not only to her beauty or her kindness, but to the way she allowed him to avoid himself. When she withdraws, she takes away his refuge, leaving him face to face with his own solitude. Some men will run from this, blaming her for their discomfort. Others will attempt to dominate her into breaking the silence. But the rare man, the man willing to grow, will endure it. He will let the silence refine him, stripping him of illusions until he can stand as her equal, no longer needing her energy to survive, but able to meet her from his own wholeness. This is the secret she must know: silence is not emptiness. It is sacred ground. It is the crucible where truth emerges, where illusions fall apart, where both man and woman can finally see themselves clearly. The one who cannot withstand it is not yet ready to hold her presence. The one who can, may yet discover a deeper love, not the love of possession, but the love born of freedom. Silence, when chosen by a woman, has a texture that unsettles the masculine psyche. It is not the silence of indifference, nor the silence of ignorance, but the silence of death. It is the kind of silence that feels like standing before an ocean at night, vast, impenetrable, endlessly reflective. In this space, a man senses both her distance and her power. He knows instinctively that she has withdrawn into a realm he cannot follow unless he too descends into his own unconscious. And this terrifies him. The male ego thrives on knowing. It wants to classify, to predict, to explain. But silence denies him that comfort. When her words vanish, so do his categories. He no longer knows whether she loves or hates him, whether she plans to stay or leave, whether she is hurt or liberated. The ambiguity slices through his illusions. It forces him to face the truth that he cannot control the story she carries within. And because his identity has often been built upon the responses of women, her laughter confirming his charm, her tears confirming his power, her attention confirming his worth, the absence of those responses feels like annihilation. Jung taught that the anima carries both creative and destructive qualities. When embraced, she guides a man toward his soul. When resisted, she appears as chaos and dread. The silent woman embodies this archetypal tension. She is both invitation and refusal. She invites him into maturity by refusing to feed his neediness. She awakens him by no longer playing the role he expected. He thought he knew her, silence proves he never did. For the woman, silence often emerges as a final stage of awakening. She realizes words cannot heal what he refuses to confront. She understands that explanations have become a currency he takes without gratitude. And so she stops giving. In doing so, she steps out of the entanglement of rescuing, soothing, and proving. Silence becomes her declaration of sovereignty, the subtle but unshakable reminder that she belongs first to herself. A man may interpret this as rejection, but in truth it is liberation. Silence liberates her from the cycle of giving beyond her capacity. Silence liberates him from the illusion that she will always carry his weight. It creates a crucible where his dependency is revealed in its rawest form. Some will rage against it, desperate to restore the dynamic they once controlled. Others will attempt manipulation, guilt, flattery, threats, all designed to pierce the stillness. But none of these methods can restore what her silence has transformed. To the discerning woman, this moment becomes a test. She sees how he responds when the fountain of her energy no longer flows. Does he descend into anger? Does he shrink into self-pity? Or does he confront the silence within himself, beginning the arduous work of individuation? His reaction tells her whether he is a partner or a prisoner of his own shadow. And to you listening, perhaps you have felt this shift in your own life. Perhaps you remember the first time you withheld words, not from spite, but from exhaustion. You noticed how quickly the balance of power tilted, how his voice grew louder as yours grew still. You discovered that silence is not emptiness, but a kind of presence too powerful to ignore. It is the language of boundaries spoken without sound. The fear it stirs in him is ancient. Beneath the surface, every man carries the memory of separation from the maternal embrace, the terror of abandonment by the primordial feminine. When you withdraw, you awaken this memory. He is not merely afraid of losing you, he is afraid of losing the archetypal feminine, of facing the void without the nourishment he has always expected. His panic is not always personal, it is mythic. Yet the silence is also medicine. For those who can endure it, silence becomes the teacher of self-sufficiency. A man who can remain steady when she withdraws is a man who has begun to anchor himself in his own soul. He no longer clings to her for validation, but honors her space as sacred. He learns to listen with more than ears, to feel beyond words, to respect her as an equal rather than a mirror. Such men are rare, but they exist, and they are shaped by silence more than by comfort. The irony is this: what he fears most is often what he needs most. The silence he resents is the silence that could initiate him into maturity. The withdrawal he interprets as loss is the very experience that could awaken him to his true self. But only if he surrenders his resistance and allows the silence to work upon him like a refining fire. And for the woman, silence is not about control, it is about alignment. It is the moment she chooses not to betray herself for the sake of peace. It is the moment she refuses to play therapist, mother, or constant validator. It is the moment she rests in the truth that her worth is not dependent on his recognition. This resting is what he secretly fears most, the realization that she is whole without it. The silent woman is not absent, she is present in her highest form. And the man who fears her silence reveals more about himself than he knows. When silence lingers, it becomes more than a pause, It turns into a force that rearranges the unseen architecture of the relationship. It is the invisible hand that reshapes boundaries, the unseen line that divides dependence from sovereignty. A woman who withdraws into silence steps out of the role that a man's unconscious often demands of her, the eternal responder, the constant mirror, the one who validates his existence through words. In Jungian language, this is the shattering of projection. He no longer sees her merely as the anima he projected onto her, but as an independent being, unpredictable and untamed. The fear this awakens in him is primal. Silence threatens his illusion of dominance, of indispensability. For centuries, cultures have written myths of women whose silence altered the destiny of men. Think of the priestess who refused to answer the king, the oracle who spoke only when she chose, the goddess who disappeared into the underworld without explanation. The absence of her voice was never weakness, it was the initiation of transformation. The silence of a woman does not erase her presence, it amplifies it into something uncanny, something that cannot be managed or consumed. What unsettles a man most is that silence makes her unpredictable. Words, even harsh ones, give him direction. They tell him what to defend, what to argue, what to repair. But silence strips him of that guidance. He feels disoriented, left in a fog where his usual weapons of persuasion and control no longer function. He may try to provoke her, hurling accusations, hoping anger will shatter the stillness. He may plead, attempting to pull her back into the role of comforter. But each attempt only deepens the abyss, because silence cannot be broken by force, it is a choice, and choice is sovereignty. For the woman, this sovereignty is liberation. Silence allows her to gather the fragments of herself scattered by endless explanations. It draws her energy inward, back into her own body, back into her own soul. It is a return to the sacred center, the place Jung described as the self, the archetype of wholeness, beyond the masks of persona and the wounds of ego. When she enters this silence consciously, she touches a power far greater than any validation could provide. She remembers that her voice is not owed to anyone. It is a gift, and she chooses when to give it. The man, meanwhile, confronts the collapse of his illusions. He begins to see that what he feared losing was not her words, but the way those words kept his shadow at bay. Her silence exposes his loneliness, his lack of inner grounding, his hunger for attention. It is not that she has abandoned him, but that she has withdrawn the mirror in which he avoided seeing himself. Jung warned that without shadow integration, a man will always search outside himself for wholeness. Silence forces him to recognize that no woman can fill that void forever. This is why silence feels so dangerous. It destabilizes his ego's scaffolding. It makes him realize that her love, her presence, her energy, none of it was guaranteed. She can choose to give, and she can choose to withdraw. And in that realization, he senses the fragility of his own control. He fears silence because silence reminds him of truth, that no one belongs to him, that love cannot be demanded, that the feminine cannot be owned. But beneath fear lies possibility. If a man chooses courage over panic, silence can become his initiation. Instead of fighting it, he can learn to sit within it. Instead of projecting blame, he can reflect inward. What wounds surface when she grows quiet? What old fears awaken? What does he discover about his need for her voice, her attention, her constant affirmation? These are the questions that silence asks, and only the brave are willing to answer. And for you, the woman listening, know this: your silence is not empty space. It is power in its purest form. It is not meant to manipulate, but to reveal. It reveals who he truly is when he can no longer draw from you. It reveals whether he values you as a sovereign soul or only as a source of energy. It reveals whether he can rise to meet you as an equal or whether he remains chained to the ego's hunger. The silence of a woman is not a void, it is an altar. It is the sacred pause that demands reverence. And while a man may fear it, his fear is the very key to his transformation. In silence, both are tested. She is tested in her ability to remain rooted without giving herself away. He is tested in his capacity to face himself without leaning on her voice. And in that testing, the truth of their bond emerges with painful clarity. The silence she holds is the silence of queens, mystics, and healers throughout history. It is not submission, it is command. And it is through that command that she discovers her deepest freedom. There comes a moment in the dynamic between man and woman when silence is no longer simply an absence of words but a declaration of essence. It is the invisible crown she wears, a crown he cannot remove. He feels it in the way her stillness lingers like an unsolvable riddle. It unsettles him because he realizes that her silence is not weakness, it is authority. Jung would describe this as the anima in her transcendent form, the mysterious feminine who no longer reflects his projections but instead illuminates the parts of himself he refuses to see. What a man secretly fears most is not that she will never speak again, but that he has lost his access to her inner world. For so long, her words served as his reassurance, her explanations softened the jagged edges of his insecurity. Without them, he stands exposed. He begins to sense that he has mistaken possession for intimacy. Her silence reveals that her soul was never his to own, and this revelation cuts deeper than any spoken rejection. Silence has always carried the weight of initiation. In ancient traditions, initiates were placed in silence before receiving wisdom. They were made to sit with themselves, stripped of distraction, until their shadow surfaced. In a similar way, the silence of a woman initiates the man into his own truth. He must now confront his hunger for validation, his reliance on her energy, his avoidance of solitude. It is a spiritual test disguised as a relational conflict. And though he resists it, the test is necessary if he ever wishes to love without chains. For the woman, silence is a sanctuary. It is where she returns to herself, where she remembers her wholeness apart from his recognition. Too often, women are trained to speak to soothe, to explain to appease, to fill the air with words to prevent discomfort. But silence breaks this pattern. It says without speaking, I will not carry what is not mine. I will not empty myself to ease your fear. In this choice, she embodies self-respect in its purest form. And notice what happens when she does. The man who once felt confident in his grip begins to unravel. He may pace, he may demand, he may plead. He may call her cold, accuse her of manipulation, or attempt to guilt her into speaking. But each word he throws into the silence echoes back to him, showing him the depth of his dependence. He fears that her silence is distance, but what he truly fears is the reflection it casts upon his own emptiness. Jung taught that the shadow, when denied, grows monstrous. A man denied of the woman's words must face his own shadow, the abandonment he never healed, the rejection he never integrated, the insecurity he never admitted. Her silence becomes the stage on which all of these shadows perform. If he dares to watch, he will see himself clearly for the first time. If he refuses, he will lash out, blaming her for the feelings he cannot own. To you, the woman hearing these words, do not underestimate the sacredness of your silence. It is not a void, it is a mirror. It is not passive, it is profoundly active. It is the very force that separates what is real from what is false. In silence, you reclaim the energy you once scattered into explanations. You stop pouring water into a vessel full of holes. You return to yourself, and in that return, you radiate a strength that no man can easily dismiss. The truth is, what he fears is also what draws him closer. He is magnetized by the mystery, compelled by the unknown. He cannot stop thinking of what you might be holding back, what world you inhabit when you no longer speak. He feels powerless, and yet this very powerlessness awakens a strange desire in him. He begins to crave not your words, but your presence. Not your explanations, but your essence. Silence makes him confront the truth. He cannot own you, he can only honor you. The paradox is this: in the very silence he fears, lies the potential for real love. Not love built on dependence, but love born of freedom. If he chooses to endure the silence instead of breaking it, if he learns to sit with the discomfort instead of forcing resolution, he will begin to grow. He will learn patience. He will learn to respect boundaries. He will learn that intimacy is not control, but communion. Silence offers him the possibility of transformation, if he is willing to surrender his ego to it. And for the woman, the silence is both ending and beginning. It ends the old game of overgiving, of justifying, of carrying more than her share. It begins the path of self-possession, where she speaks only when her soul chooses, where her words are gifts, not obligations. She does not use silence to manipulate, but to remember herself. And in remembering, she becomes unshakable. This is the secret: silence is not what breaks men. It is what reveals them. The man who cannot withstand it was never ready to meet her soul. The man who can endure it has taken his first step toward true maturity. And the woman who wields it with intention discovers the freedom she had all along. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.